have them oneself. My question is, whatever Bhutto was doing, everything it had in it, it had political motivations, it has a patronage, rent seeking, and a collaboration with a class of people to gain his legitimacy. So, how do you evaluate or analyze this whole scenario?
I think that's you rightly pointing this out. I mean, this is a good way to understand all the things you've said are characteristic of Pakistan's civil service or bureaucracy even today. And so rent seeking, most of our state-owned enterprises even
Patronage.
today, political patronage, rent seeking behavior. We say these things about our bureaucracy even today. I mean, this is not something which is peculiar to the Bhutto era or something which is characteristic only of the Bhutto era, but perhaps of other eras in Pakistan. When one looks at Pakistan's civil service or its bureaucracy or services, like for instance the Pakistan Administrative Service, which has been the linchpin of the bureaucracy, erstwhile called the District Management Group. All of them thrive on political patronage. Our bureaucracy generally has been very strongly politicized. Um, and then, of course, there is that idea of rent seeking, very strong lobby groups. And because Bhutto was nationalizing industries, and you rightly pointed this out, and Pakistan was moving towards like a socialist economy, it was very natural for not just these private sector firms which were nationalized by the state, but also other government state-owned enterprises or government's own institutions, which were very strongly unionized during that era. So the idea was eventually was, and if Bhutto wanted to sort of implement the Stalinist kind of or USSR style socialism, it would have eventually meant that these labor unions that we today so despise, and something that you call labor militancy, these kind of organizations were leading, or these were the organizations at the helm of affairs in the industrial sector in other socialist economies of the world. That experiment did not take place in Pakistan. In Pakistan, we were at the phase where the state was controlling these industries, not labor unions. But the eventual idea could have been, if these labor unions eventually became so strong that they could have eventually taken over, if not all, perhaps some of these industries. But I agree with you that most of these industrial enterprises basically showed the same picture or were exactly what Pakistan's state-owned enterprises or Pakistan's institutions control and run by the government today are. Because these are all characteristics of a colonial bureaucracy. And we were not just a colonial bureaucracy, we were a rotten colonial bureaucracy. And that same colonial bureaucracy had then started taking over these enterprises. So they took the exact same system that they had in the public sector, they took it to these nationalized industries. So essentially, the nationalized industries mirrored the kind of bureaucratic polity that existed within the organizations or institutions run and controlled by the state. So it was exactly the same thing. I mean, you do not need to do like a fresh or a separate analysis for the nationalized industries. They were just the standard bureaucracy that Pakistan had, which was, like, I, at the cost of repeating myself, characterized by the things you just mentioned: red tapeism, nepotism, overstaffing, rent-seeking behavior, very strong politicization of these institutions, and all of these had like adverse effects on the efficiency and productivity of these industries, which is why industrial production declined, and they had adverse effects on economic growth. Yes.
If we understand from the standpoint of political economy, let's assume that Bhutto done what he wanted to done, and he had sufficient time to implement his vision. Like he got 4 5 good years, 6 years to implement his vision, and he did everything to appease that class, that those stratas of the society which he thought that were marginalized back in the time of Ayub's era. And he started politicizing or building his whole economic narrative around that class of workers, of laborers, of the unions and everything. Then if we see the results of 1977's election, so Bhutto's resort to the political violence, to the political centralism, and the use of bureaucracy and use of the state resources to rig the election, then why his own class, the very class he was looking after or he was trying to make their lives better, did not sort of say, I don't want to say did not vote for him, but not voted enough to steer his ship out of the troubling water.
That's true. Vakasab, something that needs to be understood is that nationalization of industries in itself would not have eliminated poverty. I mean, the idea was to do something that could sort of redistribute resources within the economy and ensure. I mean, if tomorrow Pakistan nationalizes all its industries, including the textile sector, but doesn't do anything to roll sort of really ensure that the samrat of that are go to the poor people, the poor person would still be marginalized in the economy. I mean, I don't see, if I do like an analysis of the Bhutto era, I don't see something other than political slogans, which was really done to affect the marginalization of the classes you talk about. There's nothing that was really done towards that. I mean, maybe some, like I said, that there some large scale development projects were being implemented. But as the literature says, those development projects take a while to sort of really redistribute resources within an economy. And I mean, unless.
सॉरी मैं यहाँ पे जस्ट वन सेकेंड,
जी
एक
जी
एक
जी
एक ऐसे रिटोरिकल क्वेश्चन है और हो सकता है वो आपकी डज नॉट फॉल इनटू परफेक्टली टू योर डोमेन, राइट?
Mhm.
बट एक फिक्रा हम वी हैव ग्रोन अप लिसनिंग टू वन सेंटेंस दैट पाकिस्तान का मकबूल तरीन जो लीडर था, he was hanged and by a dictator, right? So
Yeah.
the situations we are talking about, the situations you are mentioning, the people with whom he had his hope that these people would, protect him or would come out of street to the streets and save him or provide him that cover to be not hanged by the dictator.
I
So
think
if
Bhutto.
that means he was not that much popular, maybe the what we hear or what we've been told by the books or the writers.
I think Bhutto had lost considerable ground by 1977's elections. Also because of a very strong opposition called the Pakistan National Alliance (PNA), gaining a lot of strength, which was an alliance of 8 parties gaining strength against Bhutto. And so PNA had gained immense ground before the 1977's election. And if the elections were not rigged, as most people would call it, Bhutto might have lost also. But this is not to say that Bhutto in 1977 had lost all popularity or he was not a popular leader. It's very hard to, make this sort of a definitive claim about Bhutto. He was popular, and he had great control over, I would call them political institutions within an economy, which he had used to his favor very, very effectively. He also did a lot of, like I said, a lot of things which were popular. So, for instance, Bhutto's role within the Muslim world was really hailed by people within Pakistan, given the political economy of Islam or political relevance of Islam within Pakistan. So,
Well, that
so
that that too seems. I mean, the more I'm reading about Pakistan or Pakistan's history, so actually I'm getting this sense that there is no one era which we read or which we can truly understand without, understanding the geopolitical sort of approvals and the global or the
exactly,
regional dynamics not favoring
exactly.
the Pakistan's political regime.
Exactly, and so yeah, I mean, Pakistan from its very early days was strongly embedded within an international polity, and um, call it geopolitics or call it Pakistan's geo political or geostrategic location, or call it whatever you want to call it. But I mean, different people could talk about different things. Why Pakistan has been relevant within the global politics in different eras. But the reality is that it has been. And it has brought kind of mixed effects to Pakistan. It has if you look at foreign aid, and we discussed foreign aid when we discussed Ayub's era in a lot of detail. If you discuss foreign aid, one would see that Pakistan has immensely benefited from its geostrategic location or its relevance in global politics. But then, if you see, these political instability in Pakistan, one also sees that, Pakistan, or perhaps, the situation that developed after war on terror, one then starts to reconsider the thought that Pakistan has benefited from its geostrategic location or its relevance within global politics. But yes, Pakistan. I mean, if you look at the 1970s, Wakasa, one thing that one might want to consider was that Bhutto's era was at the peak of Cold War, but Pakistan was not really needed by the US at that time, and this is something that needs to be understood. So I think the United States had accomplished I mean, had made a lot of gains during the 1960s, during the Ayub era, was when Pakistan was really badly needed by the US. So I think by the 1970s, Pakistan was not, perhaps Pakistan still needed, the Cold War was continuing. Pakistan was still needed by the US, but perhaps not as much as Pakistan was needed in the 50s and the 60s. So I think, uh, s- and that also sort of led Bhutto to sort of really become closer to China, which was also, as I keep saying, his preconceived notion before he became prime minister. So I think the global politics was changing. That also leaned him towards the Muslim world and China, both of them, and so he used both of these to great effect in his domestic politics. He used Islam. Uh, Through his closeness with the Muslim world, organized the first Muslim conference in Pakistan, and then the other thing that he used to good effect was China. Consider something, Waqas साहब, कितना मुश्किल हो आजकल के किसी लीडर के लिए to come up with a country like China that has nothing to do with Islam. Their local religion is completely different. They look completely different. They speak a different language. Pakistan effectively has, or Pakistani people have absolutely no similarity with the Chinese. But he sold that idea so well to the Pakistani people in the 70s. And that was the effect of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his politics. I mean, he was a great orator. One would not should not take that away from him. He was a great orator, a great politician. He could charm the crowd, and so
uh, Max Weber's charismatic leader.
charismatic leader. He was, and all populists are Max Weber's charismatic leader. So he used his charisma to such great effect, especially when it came to building legitimacy for the Chinese within Pakistan. So I mean, to answer your question, I mean, it's important to understand that Bhutto was doing the kind of things which were popular, and so while Bhutto would have lost a lot of ground by 1977, he did not lose all ground, and so it was difficult. And what was PNA's strength, by the way? PNA was an alliance of 8 parties, but most of those parties were Islamic parties, and you have to understand that it was led by somebody called Maulana Mufti Mahmood, a great scholar, Islamic scholar and leader from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, father of Maulana Fazlur Rahman, and an extremely respected religious cleric from KP, a down to earth man from the middle class who rose to become the chief minister of KP, also leader of the Jamiat Ulama Islam, then a leader of the PNA. What was PNA's comparative advantage over Bhutto, or their unique selling point, their USP? Their unique selling point was just Islam. And they were branding Bhutto at that time as somebody who was anti-Islam, or perhaps like a modern leader who drank, spoke English, wore very expensive suits,
But
was
I
educated
read,
in the
but
West.
I read somewhere in a book of history, I can't recall the name, that when Bhutto did the second amendment
Hmm.
to appease the religious right and in order to gain their favor.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, the very famous clerics of that time, they spoke to Bhutto in private, or spoke to the other people, that this is the man, which we saw in dream, that would accomplish a unleft mission, and he's the blessed one and the chosen one, and it is the God's will that he has chosen Bhutto. And he was given such comments or remarks directly and indirectly, just to make him feel that he has done something special. And what we are talking about, that later on the very same class, kind of the very same people, or the very same class was revolting against.
I mean, that's exactly the point I'm making. It's perhaps not the very same class. I mean, something that needs to be understood was that Bhutto was hailed as the leader of the Islamic world. As I said, during the OIC summit, he was doing great things as far as Islam is concerned. Also, he brought the ulama on board during the 1973 constitutions. I mean, he gave like an Islamic color to the 1973 constitution that really pleased Pakistan's religious right, as you call it. But I think he eventually fell out with the religious right. But also, I mean, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. That Bhutto's Islamic gestures, or his leaning towards Islam, or his occasional leaning towards Islam, as I would call it, also kind of created a divide between. The Pakistan's religious right, or Pakistan's Islamic scholars, or perhaps ulama within Pakistan. So I think at the PNA, I would carefully term this, was the political Islam that was against Bhutto. But the real Islamic scholars or ulama were kind of divided over who Bhutto was, or whether he could be branded as the champion of Islam within Pakistan, or a political leader, or perhaps the blessed one, as you call it. So I think one thing that Bhutto successfully did was that he used Islam to such effect that he created a divide within the religious right. There were some people who were kind of ambivalent about Bhutto, who thought that Bhutto had done some good for Islam, and so did not oppose him. But then there was these political parties, which were Islamic political parties, something that I call political Islam, who eventually organized themselves into the Pakistan National Alliance, the PNA, and then started opposing Bhutto. So I think Bhutto gained from Islam, and something that Islamic socialism, the 1973 constitution, the OIC, and so on and so forth. So some of these Islamic gestures helped him at least gain favor of some of these Islamic groups, if not all of them. And of course, some others at the same time were alienated, who eventually formed the Pakistan National Alliance against him and gained immense amount of strength after 1975. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And there is a one little question I would
Sure.
like to ask, if you have more time, like
No, sure.
2 point.
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
There is
Yes.
a one more important dimension which I would like to make, that the center province bargaining of, or the aspect of this project, because some scholars argue that this process of nationalization was actually a centralizing project, because your two provinces, Balochistan and KPK, had no real industrial base. So they were actually left over out of this whole economic policy. And in Punjab, obviously SUO is expanded, jobs allocations were made in Sindh, particularly the Karachi or the urban जो एरियाज हैं वहाँ पे अर्बन जो आपकी कह ले यूनियंस हैं वो empowered हुई, और कुछ ethnic conflicts जो हैं वो भी वहाँ पे हुए. तो was it how it impacted the relationship between the center and the provinces?
I mean, Waqas Saab, I would confess that I this is an area of Bhutto's politics that I've not explored in a lot of detail, but it provides me sort of a reason to look into it. Great question. I mean, it's at the very outset. It seems that there was. I mean, this. I don't think that this was a thing leaving out Balochistan or KP for that matter. I don't think it was a planned move, and it was a discriminatory policy by the state. Of course, industries wherever they existed would have been nationalized, and most of the industrial base was in Punjab, some in Sindh, as you rightly point out. So so जहाँ पे industries होनी थी उन्होंने वहीं nationalize करनी थी या वहीं उन्होंने रहना था. Yes, something that could have been done was to sort of ताकि उनके सम्राट दूसरे सूबों में भी जाते, could have been to sort of expand the industrial base to other provinces, or the state could have
Since it was
expanded
easier
industrial.
for state, since it everything was controlled by the state, so
Yes,
state could have used that centralized
exactly.
power to actually redistribute the power.
Redistribute the power or take that industrial activity to, if I mean, industries were used as a device to provide employment only, which the Pakistani state always does, or bureaucratic control always does, or populist leaders always do, is to provide jobs without any sort of due consideration to how that will affect industrial profits. And so, this is how the Pakistan steel mills or other state owned enterprises have become overstaffed now, because every government comes in, they promise people jobs. Government's job is not to provide jobs. The government's job is to create a conducive environment in which the private sector can generate jobs. But because the industries were being nationalized, they were providing jobs. If that was the whole idea, then jobs could have been provided to people in KP or Balochistan if the industrial activity was taken to those provinces. But because those provinces did not have an industrial base before Bhutto came into power, industries were only nationalized wherever they existed. And so that could have created these kind of provincial differences when it came to the economic effects of Bhutto's nationalization. But this is something that I would like to sort of read into, and something that we could potentially discuss in the future. But one thing that I would like to say is that maybe I understood your question wrong, but regardless of where the industries existed, the entire nationalization was a centralization idea. I mean, industries were centralized, and one thing, Wakasab, that needs to be understood is that Pakistan was not a very strong federalism before 1973. And even after 1973, Pakistan was still, I mean, on paper, we graduated towards a stronger federalist state. And when I say federalist state, I hope that the students understand that federalism essentially means stronger constituent units. And Pakistan's constituent units at that time were only provinces, because we had not started talking about local governments, which happened much later after the 18th Amendment. So we were only talking about provinces. But provincial governments were not strong. We were more like a unitary government before 1973, and with a very very strong center. So there was an inherent centralization within the system because provinces were not strong. I mean, we did have provincial assemblies, and what और इसका जो एक इंडिकेटर है ना वकास साहब, वो तीन चीजें हैं कि अगर आपके स्टेट के तीन पिलर्स हैं तो इसका जो लिटमस टेस्ट है वो बड़ा सिंपल है. आप ये देखो कि जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट यूनिट है उसके पास अपना लेजिस्लेचर है, अपनी जुडिशरी है और अपना एग्जेक्टिव. अब आज का जो पाकिस्तानी सूबा है उसके पास अपनी असेंबली है, उसके पास अपना प्रोविंशियल हाई कोर्ट हर सूबे के पास, और उसके पास अपना सिविल सेक्रेटेरिएट है, which is the executive. These things might have existed before 1973, but with very very little powers, because Pakistan was more like a unitary state. So there was already, even perhaps before the nationalization project, Pakistan centralization was very strong in Pakistan. And so nationalization, I agree with you, added to that centralization. But I don't think that in terms of the distribution of power between the center, of course, you compare the provinces with each other. And as we discussed, there could have been differences on the basis of where the industries originally existed, and the government failed to sort of expand the industrial activity to other provinces. But I don't think that nationalization would have disturbed this equilibrium between the center and the provinces, because there was already a very strong centralization, and that centralization increased, yes, but the provinces were already weak, and I don't think that that affected the provinces in any adverse way, because they I mean, you don't even remember something that's very interesting about Bhutto, and this would be my last comment. Has anyone ever thought? I mean, Mustafa Khan is the only governor of Punjab that people often talk about. But if you analyze the Bhutto era, nobody ever hears any name of any chief minister. Nobody talks about them. Who was the chief minister of Punjab during Bhutto era? Provinces were not very strong. Bhutto was such a dominating leader that there is no mention of any other leaders during the Bhutto era. So nobody talks about the people who led the provinces because provinces were not much talked about constituent units because they were not strong. And they did not have the kind of salience in the national politics as they do today, especially after the 18th Amendment. Ji Waqas.